After divorce, Nicole Kidman completely exposes the celebrity mystery of Keith Urban's tragedy. After nearly 20 years together, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's love story came crashing down. The couple who once embodied Hollywood's rarest miracle, two stars beating the odds, now stand on opposite sides of silence. The fairy tale that began under candlelight in Sydney has ended in the cold echo of a Nashville courtroom. Two words ended it all: irreconcilable differences. On that day, Keith Urban walked on stage without his wedding ring. No statement, no press release, just a man with a guitar and a wound the world could hear. He changed the lyrics of his own song, one single word twisted like a knife. Fans wept, others gasped. It wasn't a concert anymore. It was confession through melody. Nicole answered not with words but with composure. The ring was gone, but the dignity remained. She walked red carpets with her daughter's hands in hers, her eyes speaking a kind of pain she refused to name. Behind the flashes, behind the applause, was a story of love, redemption, and the quiet unraveling of two people who once swore to save each other. What truly happened between Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban? How did a love that seemed unbreakable collapse in slow motion? To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning, where two wounded souls first found each other beneath the Hollywood lights. But the darkest secret was yet to be revealed. Nicole Kidman was never meant for an ordinary life. Born in Honolulu in 1967 to Australian parents, she entered the world between two identities, an American birthplace and an Australian soul. Her father, a psychologist, was a man of intellect and order. Her mother, a nurse and activist, taught compassion and resilience. That contrast became Nicole's compass, half discipline, half dream. When the Kidman family returned to Sydney, she was shy, almost painfully so. Teachers recalled how she'd freeze when called on, her cheeks turning crimson. Yet inside that silence, a storm was forming. Acting became her rebellion, a way to speak without words. Ballet led to drama, and drama led to the stage, where shyness transformed into something electric. She wasn't the timid girl anymore. She was anyone she wanted to be. At 16, she starred in BMX Bandits, a quirky Australian film that caught Hollywood's wandering eye. Her height, her porcelain skin, her eyes that seemed to hold an entire story, they made her unforgettable. Within a few short years, Nicole Kidman was no longer just an actress. She was a symbol of grace wrapped around fire. But behind the success was a constant ache, the search for belonging. Her fame came early, but love and stability lagged behind. Then, on a movie set in 1989, she met a man who would redefine her world, Tom Cruise. Together, they became the golden couple of the 1,990 seconds, beautiful, unstoppable, and untouchable. Yet within that perfection was control, pressure, and faith so absolute it left no air to breathe. When the marriage ended, Nicole lost not just a partner but the family she had built. The children she adored became distant shadows. The pain carved deep into her, and she swore that one day she would find a love she could protect, a love that wouldn't vanish. Years later, that vow would lead her to a man whose voice could make stadiums cry, but even the sweetest melodies carry cracks beneath the sound. Keith Urban's story began far from the glamour of Hollywood in the small town of Whangarei, New Zealand, 1967. The air smelled of salt and asphalt, and country music was an alien language. His father, Bob Urban, ran a convenience store by day and spun old Johnny Cash records by night. That was the soundtrack of Keith's childhood, the hum of a tired freezer and the heartbeat of a steel string guitar. When the Urbans moved to Queensland, Australia, the boy with the long hair and restless eyes carried that music with him. By 6, he could play guitar better than most grown men at the local pub. By 13, he was playing in smoky bars he wasn't even old enough to enter. Music was never a hobby, it was oxygen. School couldn't hold him, only the stage could. But behind that raw talent was turbulence. Money was scarce, family tensions high, and the ache to prove himself endless. The applause he earned on stage became medicine for something deeper, a hunger to matter. That hunger soon mixed with something darker. As fame flickered closer, Keith found himself in the grip of alcohol and drugs. The lights were bright, but the nights were longer. By his 20s, the boy who dreamed of Nashville had turned his pain into poetry. When his self-titled American debut album landed in 1999, critics called him the next big thing in country music. Women adored his voice. Men admired his grit. Yet success didn't heal him, it only amplified the noise inside. Through every hit song and sold-out show, Keith wore the same smile, but behind it was exhaustion, addiction, and guilt. He'd clawed his way to the top, but couldn't silence the chaos that followed him there. And then, in 2005, fate handed him a number: Nicole Kidman's. What began as a chance encounter would ignite into a love that burned bright enough to light up two worlds and eventually to consume them both. But before their story turned tragic, it began like every Hollywood dream, with hope disguised as destiny. It was January 2005, the G'day USA Gala in Los Angeles, an elegant celebration of Australian talent abroad. Nicole Kidman walked into the room like she belonged to another century. Statuesque, poised, a ghost of old Hollywood. Keith Urban was there too, tousled hair, quiet confidence, eyes that carried both charm and fatigue, two worlds about to collide. When they were introduced, it was brief, almost uneventful. He smiled, polite but distant. She thought he wasn't interested. He took her number but didn't call. Weeks turned into months. Nicole moved on with her life: film sets, interviews, the constant orbit of celebrity. Then out of nowhere, Keith reached out. One phone call, one conversation, and something shifted. Their connection was immediate, not fireworks, but gravity. Two people shaped by loneliness found an echo in each other. For Nicole, Keith was unlike anyone she had ever known. He wasn't the polished movie star like Tom Cruise. He was unfiltered, tender, raw. For Keith, Nicole wasn't a conquest. She was sanctuary proof that he could be more than the chaos he carried. By mid-2005, the tabloids caught the first photos. A quiet dinner, a shared laugh, two guarded souls trying not to fall too fast. But love has its own rhythm, and theirs moved fast, too fast for the world to doubt it was real. A year later, on the 25th of June, 2006, they married at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel overlooking the ocean in Sydney. Candles flickered against the marble, Nicole in a Balenciaga gown, Keith singing to her with trembling voice and teary eyes. The world saw perfection. Two wounded hearts finally at peace. But beneath the veil and applause, the first cracks were already forming. Just 4 months after the wedding, Keith would walk into rehab, and the fairy tale would take its first breath of reality. Because even the brightest love stories begin to flicker when old ghosts refuse to die. Their wedding was a cathedral of hope. The 25th of June, 2006, Sydney bathed in gold light, the harbor calm as if holding its breath. Nicole walked down the aisle through a sea of candles, her father at her side, her eyes shimmering with both joy and disbelief. The shy girl from Sydney had come full circle, returning home not as a movie star, but as a woman reborn. Keith stood at the altar waiting, his guitar nearby, his hands shaking slightly. When he sang to her later that night, it wasn't performance, it was promise. To the world, they were the perfect union of elegance and authenticity. Hollywood royalty and Nashville soul. Magazines called them the golden couple. For Nicole, the ceremony meant redemption. After years of heartbreak, she had finally built a home that felt safe. For Keith, it was salvation. He had married not just a woman, but his reason to stay sober, to keep living. But fairy tales aren't made for real life. 4 months later, the headlines exploded. Keith Urban checks into rehab. The story broke like thunder. The man who had just promised forever was fighting the same demons he thought he'd buried. Nicole was silent for days. When she finally appeared in public, she wore no expression of shame, only fierce loyalty. She visited him quietly, refusing interviews, protecting him from the cameras like a shield. For the tabloids, it was scandal. For her, it was duty. She had lost one husband to forces beyond her control. She wasn't going to lose another without a fight. Keith later said she saved his life, but even love, built on rescue, carries a dangerous weight. Because when one partner becomes the healer and the other the wounded, love slowly shifts into survival. And survival always comes at a cost. As the years went on, fame, distance, and parenthood would test every vow they made that candlelit night and every wound they thought had healed. For a time, it looked like they had triumphed. By 2008, the headlines had softened, and their smiles on red carpets seemed effortless again. Keith Urban was climbing to the top of country music, Grammys, sold-out tours, a new album every year. Nicole Kidman was commanding Hollywood, balancing blockbusters like Australia with intimate, award-winning performances in Rabbit Hole. To the world, they had become living proof that love could survive addiction, distance, and fame. But success is a double-edged crown. While the world saw power and poise, inside the marriage there was fatigue, long absences, and quiet misunderstandings. Their rule was simple: never be apart for more than 3 weeks. Yet work rarely obeys rules. Nicole filmed across continents. Keith lived out of tour buses and hotel rooms. Time zones replaced dinner tables. When their first daughter, Sunday Rose, was born in 2008, everything changed. Nicole threw herself into motherhood with the intensity of someone trying to rewrite history. She had lost contact with her adopted children years earlier, and this time she would not let distance steal her family again. Keith adored his new role as a father, but the rhythm of touring clashed with the rhythm of home. 2 years later came their second daughter, Faith Margaret, born via surrogate in 2010. To outsiders, it was a picture-perfect family. Yet those close to them whispered that Nicole's protective nature and Keith's restless spirit were pulling them in opposite directions. He lived through the pulse of applause. She longed for quiet stability. Still, they smiled for the cameras, hand in hand, every glance rehearsed to reassure the world and maybe themselves that everything was fine. They became experts at performing happiness. Behind the flashbulbs, though, life was turning into negotiation. Between his chaos and her calm, his stage and her silence, love was still there, but it had to fight for air. And as the years rolled forward, the cracks that once seemed small would soon widen until no spotlight could hide them. Through the 2010 seconds, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban built a public image so flawless it bordered on myth. Red carpet appearances glowed with affection. Their speeches at award shows turned into poetry. Keith would look at her with glassy eyes and say she'd saved him. Nicole, hand on his arm, would smile like she believed love could rewrite destiny. To millions, they were the rare miracle two stars who had conquered both fame and heartbreak. Magazine covers called them Hollywood's strongest couple. Interviewers framed them as proof that devotion could survive distance, addiction, and time. But behind those perfect photographs, something subtler was happening: erosion. Nicole's life had been built on structure: call times, scripts, plans, control. Keith's life was built on rhythm: songs, spontaneity, and the unpredictable highs of performance. Those two worlds coexisted beautifully for a while, until they began to rub raw. She wanted home. He needed motion. She healed through quiet. He healed through noise. Friends close to them noticed the shift first. Nicole started appearing alone at more events, poised but quieter, her smile lingering just a beat too long. Keith, meanwhile, buried himself in work tour after tour, show after show, as if the music could drown out the silence waiting at home. Still, when they were together, they held hands like lifelines. You could feel the effort behind the tenderness, the practiced rhythm of two people desperate to keep a promise they no longer knew how to fulfill. By the mid-2010 seconds, whispers began to spread. Too many nights apart, too many tears behind closed doors. Nicole's calm became mistaken for distance. Keith's freedom began to look like escape. They kept smiling anyway. Because sometimes, pretending is the only way to keep love breathing a little longer. But the world's most beautiful illusion can't last forever, and soon, the rumors would begin to sound a lot like prophecy. By 2015, the whispers had become a steady hum. Tabloids called them a couple on the edge, while headlines dissected every ringless appearance, every solo red carpet, every lyric Keith sang that might hint at pain. Some stories claimed she was too controlling. Others painted him as the restless artist who couldn't be tamed. Neither was true, and both contained pieces of the truth. Nicole handled it the only way she knew how: silence. When asked about the marriage, she smiled, straightened her back, and said calmly, "We've never been stronger." Her tone was so composed it silenced entire press rooms. Keith, on the other hand, met rumors with emotion, teary-eyed tributes on stage, speeches about how lucky he was, love songs dedicated to her between tours. To fans, they were unbreakable. To those close enough to see behind the curtain, the effort was exhausting. Nicole had become the anchor, steady, unwavering, but tired. Keith, the dreamer, was drifting again, pulled by the same winds that once made him great. The cracks deepened quietly. Nicole's smiles grew thinner, her laughter more practiced. Keith's confessions in interviews sounded rehearsed, like a man convincing himself. They were still showing up for each other, but the spark had become duty. Affection turned into choreography. By 2020, the couple was living in two different rhythms. Nicole was building a career renaissance with Big Little Lies and Being the Ricardos, while Keith filled stadiums across the world. COVID lockdowns gave them temporary calm, a forced closeness that felt like old times until the world reopened and distance rushed back in. Rumors flared again in 2023 and 2024. Reports claimed they were living separate lives, their marriage a polite partnership more than a passion. Every time, they denied it. Every time, they smiled for the cameras. But even the most disciplined performance begins to crack under repetition. And when the truth finally surfaced in 2025, it wasn't explosive, it was inevitable. Because sometimes, a love story doesn't shatter with noise. It fades quietly, until one day, all that's left is silence and paperwork. September 2025, the illusion finally broke. In a Nashville courtroom, Nicole Kidman filed for divorce after 19 years of marriage. No scandalous accusations, no public drama, just two words written in black ink: irreconcilable differences. That phrase, so sterile and quiet, carried the weight of everything they had fought to protect. By the time the news spread, they had already been living apart for months. The story hit the press like a shockwave. Fans who had worshipped their love felt betrayed. How could the couple who embodied strength, loyalty, and redemption simply end? But those who truly understood love knew fairy tales don't explode. They dissolve. For Nicole, the decision was not anger, but surrender. Sources close to her said she agonized for months, torn between her devotion to family and the slow realization that she was fading inside the marriage she'd built to heal. She had spent years as caretaker, confidant, protector. She had saved him again and again, but in doing so, she had quietly stopped saving herself. The filings revealed the practical details: joint decision-making, but primary custody of their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, to Nicole. No spousal support, no financial tug-of-war. Two successful people, walking away with dignity. Yet even the cleanest break leaves invisible fractures. For Keith, the silence was unbearable. Just days after the news, he stepped onto a stage in Pennsylvania, wedding ring gone, eyes burning with something raw and unfiltered. The show that night wasn't entertainment, it was confession. During You'll Think of Me, he changed the lyric: "Take your space and take your unreasonable reasons." The crowd went silent. That single word, that small rebellion, became the loudest scream of the night. He skipped The Fighter, the song once written for Nicole, their anthem of resilience, now too painful to sing. His fans wept, recorded, posted online. Within hours, clips flooded the internet, comment sections filled with heartbreak and disbelief. Keith hadn't spoken publicly about the divorce, but he didn't have to. His music said everything. And while his pain echoed through arenas, Nicole's answer was quiet grace. No statement, no interviews. Just one appearance at a film festival, ringless, calm, eyes distant. She returned to her daughters, walked hand in hand through Nashville's streets, shielding them from the noise. For the first time, she was not playing a role, just a mother protecting what mattered most. It was a familiar kind of heartbreak. Decades earlier, after her divorce from Tom Cruise, she had lost the closeness of her adopted children. This time, she refused to let history repeat itself. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. And so, while Keith turned pain into song, Nicole turned silence into strength. Their love had ended, but their echoes would not fade so easily. In the quiet aftermath, the world began rewriting their story. For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban had been the modern myth proof that love could rise from wreckage. They had weathered addiction, distance, and fame, standing together through storms that destroy most couples. But in the end, even the strongest myths collapse under their own weight. Their love wasn't a failure. It was a mirror. It showed what happens when two extraordinary people try to heal each other's pasts, one through discipline, the other through chaos. Nicole had spent years trying to build peace around Keith's storms. Keith had spent years trying to keep up with Nicole's light. They weren't enemies. They were reflections, two souls who met at the right time, but couldn't stay aligned forever. Keith turned his heartbreak into melody. On stage, he sang not to audiences but to ghosts chasing closure through every note. His pain made him raw, but also real. In the silence between songs, you could almost hear him exhale the years he had carried like armor. Nicole, meanwhile, found her rhythm again through stillness. She poured herself into work, her daughters, and the quiet grace of survival. At premieres, she smiled softly, not the dazzling grin of red carpets past, but the knowing one of a woman who had endured and chosen peace. Her silence became her voice, calm, unwavering, powerful. And when people asked what happened, she said nothing. Because sometimes the truth isn't for the public, it's for the soul. Their story is a reminder that even the most beautiful love can end without villains. Some bonds are meant to teach, not to last. And when the lights fade and the curtain falls, what remains is not the tragedy, but the tenderness of having tried. Nicole Kidman once said, "It's not about perfection. It's about showing up again and again." For nearly 20 years, she and Keith did just that. They showed up for love, for family, for each other, until showing up meant finally letting go. Some stories aren't meant to end in forever. They end in understanding and in the quiet kind of love that survives goodbye. Because in the end, every celebrity's life hides a tragedy, every tragedy conceals a mystery, and every mystery reminds us, behind the glamour, they're just human. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, you know.